2 winters ago, a 4-day ice storm knocked out our power. I remember standing in the freezing cold of my garage, staring down into a thawing chest freezer, feeling completely and utterly helpless. I ended up bagging up and throwing away nearly 50 pounds of prime beef and pork, hundreds of dollars of hard-earned food, gone in a single weekend. Dragging those heavy, leaking trash bags to the curb was absolutely gut-wrenching. Meanwhile, my great-grandfather used to preserve that exact same amount of meat on a simple, rough-cut wooden shelf in a dirt floor root cellar, without a single watt of electricity. And that meat stayed perfectly safe and edible for well over a year. When I finally dusted off and dug into his old 1920s homesteading journals, the reality of it hit me hard. I realized we haven't just lost a recipe, we have completely lost our independence. Today I'm going to walk you through exactly how to dry cure and preserve meat the way homesteaders did a century ago, step by step, with every precise measurement you need. And stay with me to the very end, because I'll also share a stripped-down 20-minute pioneer method for preserving meat using nothing but a mason jar and rendered fat. Here is my honest confession. For years, I relied 100% on that electric chest freezer. I assumed, just like most of us are taught to assume, that plugging a box into a wall was the absolute only safe way to store bulk meat. I'd buy a quarter cow or a half a hog, pack that freezer to the brim, and feel this entirely false sense of security. But if I'm being real, there was always that underlying, gnawing anxiety. You know exactly the feeling I'm talking about. It's that quick, paranoid glance at the little blinking green light on the bottom of the freezer every time you walk by, just praying the compressor hasn't quietly died in the night. Praying a sudden summer storm or winter freeze doesn't roll through and wipe out your family's entire food supply. I was living completely at the mercy of the grid. Then I started reading through those worn, handwritten journals, tracing the steps of the 1920s method, traditional dry curing. This wasn't some trendy weekend culinary hobby for them. These were large, hard-working families, 8, 10, 12 mouths to feed around a farmhouse table, doing it primarily from their own land. They would butcher a hog in the late, crisp days of fall, and they had to eat off that single animal until the next autumn, period. They didn't have the luxury of a backup generator. This was a survival strategy born out of genuine, raw necessity to make it through brutal winters. By understanding how to transform fresh, highly perishable meat into shelf-stable protein, they ensured their own survival. Let me show you exactly how they did it. Let's talk about the biology behind why this actually works. Think of meat spoilage exactly like a swimming pool. Bacteria, the invisible things that ruin your food and make your family sick, need water to swim, multiply, and thrive. If you take away their water, they die. Here is the science most of us were simply never taught. When you pack a piece of fresh meat in salt, a biological process called osmosis occurs. The salt forcibly pulls the cellular water out of the meat while simultaneously drawing the salt deep into the tissue. You are essentially draining the swimming pool. Without active moisture inside those meat fibers, spoilage bacteria simply cannot survive. So, when you dry cure, I want you to realize this. You aren't just flavoring the meat, you are chemically altering its entire environment so that it becomes completely shelf-stable, safely sitting at room temperature. Now, let me walk you through the exact step-by-step blueprint to do this in your own home safely. Step 1 is choosing the right cut of meat. You absolutely must start with whole muscles. Think of a whole pork leg, a solid pork loin, or a full pork belly. Here is a crucial detail, and please hear me on this. Do not ever try this with ground meat. Ground meat has exposed surface area mixed throughout every single bite, which introduces outside bacteria deep into the center of the pile. That is a guaranteed recipe for disaster. We only use whole, solid, intact muscles. Step 2 is the math, and this is the make or break step. The homesteaders of the 1920s used to just bury meat in giant wooden crates of salt. But today we use a modern, much safer adaptation called equilibrium curing. First, you need to weigh your piece of meat in grams, not pounds. Grams, we need precision here. You are going to measure out exactly 2.5 to 3% of the meat's total weight in pure sea salt. Then, you'll add exactly 0.25% of the meat's weight in prog powder number 2, which is your slow-acting curing salt. And a quick warning right here. Don't use cheap, iodized table salt from the grocery store. It gives the meat a bitter, metallic taste, and the iodine prevents it from penetrating the cell walls correctly. Stick strictly to pure sea salt. Step 3 is the cure phase. Take that precise salt mixture and rub it vigorously over every single square inch of the meat. Massage it into every fold, every crevice, making sure nothing is left bare. Then, seal that meat tightly in a vacuum bag or place it in a non-reactive plastic or glass tub. Put it in your fridge, or if you're living like my great-grandfather, a cold 8-degree winter space like an unheated garage. You're going to leave it in that cold space for roughly 1 day for every half inch of the meat's thickness. That gives the salt enough time to work its way all the way to the absolute center of the cut. Step 4 is equalization and hanging. Once your curing time is up, pull the meat out and thoroughly wash off all the excess salt under cold running water. Pat it completely, entirely dry with paper towels. Next, tie it up tightly with some heavy cotton butcher's twine, creating a solid, compact shape so there are no loose flaps of meat. Finally, you hang it. You're looking for a space with roughly 60 to 70% humidity and a steady temperature right around 50 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit. A cool, unfinished basement or an old-school root cellar is absolutely perfect for this. Now, what I'm showing you today is incredibly powerful, but it is just one piece of a much bigger picture. The homesteaders of the 1920s didn't do this in isolation. Their dry curing was just one part of an entire, seamless system of food independence. And look at where most people go wrong. There are 4 silent killers I see when people first try this. And the first one is just pure impatience. We live in a modern world where we expect everything delivered in 3 days. But real historical preservation takes time. That meat has to slowly lose about 30% of its total water weight, and that takes weeks, sometimes months. You simply cannot rush the hang. Give it the time it demands. The second mistake is completely ignoring the humidity. It's a delicate balance. If your space is too dry, the outside of the meat dries way too fast and forms a hard, impenetrable shell. We call that case hardening. When that happens, the moisture gets trapped inside and the meat literally rots from the inside out. But on the flip side, if it's too wet, you get the wrong kind of mold. Which brings me to pattern 3, the fear of good mold. Most of us have been trained to panic if we see absolutely anything growing on our food. But in the 1920s, they knew that a dusting of white powdery mold, it's actually called penicillium, nalgivens, was a beautiful thing. It acts as a natural shield, protecting the meat from bad bacteria. If you see green or black mold, just wipe it off with a cloth dipped in a little vinegar. But if it's white, take a breath and leave it alone. You're doing it exactly right. The fourth pattern is the most dangerous, using the wrong salt. Let me be perfectly straight with you because honesty matters more than hype here. If you are hanging a piece of meat at room temperature for longer than a month, you absolutely must use proper curing salts. This isn't optional. It is the only way to completely prevent botulism. You have to respect the chemistry. Now, for anyone feeling a little overwhelmed by curing salts and humidity tracking, I promised you something special. I want to share the absolute simplest, most stripped-down method of meat preservation I have ever seen. I watched an old homesteader do this down in Appalachia, and it takes maybe 20 minutes of active work. It's called meat potting. Here is exactly how you do it. You take solid chunks of fresh pork or beef and cook them low and slow until they are beautifully tender. Then, you pack that cooked meat incredibly tightly into a sterilized crock or a large mason jar. Next, you take completely liquid, piping hot rendered lard or beef tallow, and you pour it directly over the meat until everything is submerged by at least a full inch. Here is why this works so flawlessly. As that thick layer of fat cools, it solidifies into an absolute, impenetrable, airtight seal. No oxygen means no oxidation and absolutely zero bacterial growth. You just store that jar in a cool, dark cupboard. In the middle of winter, when you want a hearty dinner, you just scoop out the top layer of fat, pull out those beautifully preserved pieces of meat, and heat them right up in a pan. No curing salts, no tracking humidity, just meat and fat. The whole approach to everything we've talked about today comes down to understanding one incredibly simple piece of biology. Bacteria absolutely need water and oxygen to survive. Whether you're dry curing a ham down in the basement or potting beef in rendered tallow on a pantry shelf, you are simply removing the things that cause spoilage. So, I'd love to hear from you down in the comments. Which of these two methods are you going to try first? Are you going to hang a dry cure, or are you going to pot some meat in tallow? Let me know.